right, guys, in this video today, what I'm going to talk about are like 7 plot points, all right, that you can put in your story. And I'm speaking strictly from my experience as a writer and the feedback that I got from a lot of my readers or my fans, and just paying attention when I'm reading, because I also do a lot of reading. That's also how you learn, all right, how important story arc is. So story arc, character arc, where the story reaches, you know, your midpoint, and then coming down, or the completion of the story, the climax of the story. Where should everything be happening? What should be happening to the characters? How should the characters be developing as well? This, as I said, this is just my personal experience that I've done as writing, and it's been very successful in storytelling. And I will, we're just going to get stuck right into it. So the important part for me when I'm starting my story, obviously when your reader opens that first page, you know, and they start getting into the story, that they have an understanding immediately about the world that they're involved in, that they're getting completely lost in. And yes, it is important to have backstory. But what I've found with myself, because I've seen in some authors and even some well-known authors, you know, they tend to waffle a little bit when it comes to backstory. So this is point number one. So we're talking about backstory. When I do my backstory, I find that when I mix it in between dialogue, or when I'm approaching it, or when I give the backstory, a lot of times I do it from the POV, the point of view of a character, and then you get to know a little bit more about the world that they're in and the environment that they're in and the other characters as well, okay, because your characters see each other through each other's eyes, and then they get an understanding of the world that they're in. This way your reader does as well. So when you're doing backstory, just take care that you're not downloading everything onto the first 2-3 pages of your entire world and you haven't even had dialogue yet. Okay, so you know, there's, you know, when I'm doing these writing tips as well, I can give you my opinion, but the rules are also meant to be broken, and I'm a rebel at heart, okay? So I don't strictly follow the rules, you know, the rules of writing, you know, the rules of novel writing. I sometimes break that completely. I end my stories in a completely different way. I start them in a completely different way. In the middle, things are a little bit chaotic, but at the end of the day, you are trying to get your readers so engrossed in what you're doing that they get totally lost in the story, and that is your goal. So just take care when you are talking about backstory, when you are filling them in about your world, especially like when you're doing fantasy or epic fantasy like me, or science fiction, that the world that you are creating doesn't overwhelm the characters or the story and bore your readers. Okay, so that's very, very important. So I just suggest try and get your backstory in, write shorter paragraphs, have a bit of dialogue, have a bit of action, take the reader away a little bit, and then fill them in later. You don't have to, you know, satisfy that desire to tell every tiny little detail in the first chapter. You can even do it later in the book. Okay, and I do that often with characters as well. So if a character comes in, the reader for quite a while might not know really who that character is or where they come from or what their story is. They only find out later through the eyes and the POVs of other characters. And that's how I keep the readers hooked, because they want to know the answers to things. All right, so that's the first suggestion. Okay, I'm just going to be looking at my notes in case you're wondering why I'm looking down. Okay, so you have to create a catalyst early on in your story. So a catalyst is like that thing that just sparks the story, gets everything going, you know, sets the pace as well. Remember, pace and rhythm. I can do videos on that later. Let me know in the comments if you're interested in me doing that. And catalyst is the major event that kicks off your story. What happens to get the reader hooked? Okay, and we love using that word. It's the same as posting TikTok videos as well. You know, what is the hook? Okay, because it keeps that person engaged immediately. And this kind of ties in with the backstory. Remember, you want to keep the reader, you want to get the reader hooked straight away, so you don't want to have too much boring backstory right away. So you've got to have the catalyst, the spark, the ignition happening very early on in your first chapter. All right. And Yeah, and it also sets up the rest of the story. It sets up the characters, you know. Then it's like your readers start asking the question, you know, what's going to happen to the characters because of this major event that's just happened, this fire, this explosion that's just occurred. How's it going to affect the characters? How's it going to change the characters? How's it going to affect the environment that they're living in? Okay, and then again, can you see how it gets the reader completely engrossed in the story? So you have to have that quite early on in your story, just so that you've got them. Okay, right. Third plot point is the big event. Something, it kind of ties in a little bit with the catalyst, but the big event is something that affects your character in a major way. So my main character in my epic fantasy series, The Sword Bearers, all right, in book 1, in the first chapter, something happens to her that changes her from being one kind of person into another kind of person, okay? And we're only in book 1, and I've got 12 books, okay? So how does this catalyst, all right, affect her? How does this big event that she's experienced that's completely changed her, how's it going to affect her in the rest of the story? How does she change? Her story arc starts becoming a lot more interesting now, you know, especially for the reader. How is this big event going to completely change her life? And how's it going to affect the people in her life? You know, the other main characters, the other sub-characters, you know. So there's got to be something that, especially your main protagonist, there's got to be something that completely blows the reader away and that gets them emotionally attached to your main character or characters. Okay, so like in Sword Bearers, my main character goes through a major big event and it affects everybody around her, and they change in effect. They change. Their personalities, what they experience, how they see the world completely changes because of what happens to her. And then can you see how their story arcs start developing now? Okay, fourth point, the midpoint. So the midpoint is like a major moment in the middle of your story. So like we kind of like in Act 2. So if you think of a movie, okay, movie typically has 3 acts. So your midpoint is in Act 2. So you go from your big event into your midpoint. And this is often a point of no return. Something happens to your main character or characters that kind of commits them to continuing on their journey, and they can't turn back. Whatever has happened to them changes them and the story forever. It completely unravels, like everything just, the world gets turned upside down. So in book 1 of my Sword Bearer series, the midpoint is where something happens to my character and her world where nothing will ever be the same again. Okay, so there's no going back. There is no turning around and backtracking. Okay, and the reader must go, oh no, really? You know, just remember, guys, you've got to get, I'm going to watch my video on creating real characters and real dialogue, because when your characters are real and they go through real situations and real emotional traumas and, you know, they like ripped apart, your reader is going to feel exactly the same thing. As a writer, it is vital that you get emotionally invested in what you are writing, because then you know that your readers are going to get completely lost in the story as well. So this midpoint is the point of no return, okay? They can't go back. It is the pinch. There is no ways that anything can be reversed now. The characters are committed. The planet, the galaxy, whatever genre you're writing, it is committed now. There is no going back. There's either going to be destruction lying ahead of them, or there's going to be a resolution. But the reader doesn't know yet. Okay, so that is number 4, midpoint. Right, so let's get to the crisis. The crisis now is the low point. Okay, the crisis is something happening to your character or characters that is like destroys the reader. Okay, your reader is like, this can't be happening. How can you do this to your characters. And this is when I love it, when the characters take over, don't you? Like as a writer, my characters decide what happens to them. I'll give you an example. In my Swordbearer series, okay, in book 6, something happens to a main character that you meet in book 1. So the reader gets so invested in this character and the relationship that this character has with my main character, okay? And then something happens to this character. I'm not going to give no spoilers, all right? Go read it. Okay, I'm publishing I'm so excited. I'm publishing all 12 books in the next year. Like about every 1 month to 1.5 months, I'm going to publish each book because they're all ready. All right, so one of my fans, she read the original story and she actually called me and she said, how could you do that to that character? Okay, so there is a major crisis that hits hard. And when I say hard, I mean hits hard. I mean, she was crying. She actually cried when this thing happened to this character. Okay, she was reduced to tears. Now, guys, and I said this in my previous video, when you cry writing it, your readers will cry reading it. Then you have a fan for life. When you get your readers involved in the crisis, in the drama, in the trauma of your characters and the story, there is no going back for them. Okay, there is no going back. They have to get to the end of the story. And this is what makes my Swordbearer series so appealing, is that I keep the reader hooked all the way, the readers hooked all the way through. Okay, I never let up for a second. Emotion after emotion, crisis, and because it's such a long story, okay, 12 full books, okay, I had to pay very, very close attention to the emotional impact I was having on my readers to keep them invested. And then I had to pay attention to pace. So it's very pace and rhythm. I think I must do a video on that one day. Okay, so guys, your crisis is, I would say, the most important part of the story. You know, after the catalyst, the thing that blows the story up in the beginning of your tale. Okay, right. The next point, number 6, is the showdown. So now, obviously, you've got an antagonist in your story somewhere along the line. Okay, the antagonist can come in in the beginning of the story, or you can meet them halfway. Maybe the crisis reveals an antagonist. Okay, so however you want to do it, that as a writer, that is your decision. As the storyteller, where do I bring in the antagonist? Are they there from the beginning? Are they in hiding? Are they in the shadows? And you building up that tension, and then you reveal them in the crisis or at the midpoint, okay, or in the catalyst, wherever it is that you want to create this explosion again. Okay, you reveal the antagonist, as it were. But there has to be a showdown between the characters that your readers have invested in, whose side they're on, and the antagonist who they hate. Okay, or you can do that like anti-hero thing, you know, like where there's something about the villain that like really appeals to your reader, and then they're caught in this quandary of like trying to decide, am I on the side of the protagonist anymore, or like am I on the side of the villain? Because I understand where the villain is coming from and why they are motivated to do what they are doing. Okay, but guys, there has to be a showdown. There has to be a showdown, and there has to be a winner. So you've got to decide as the storyteller who wins, who loses, or obviously if your protagonist is going to win, which is more of a payoff for the reader at the end of the day, okay, like it is in a movie, okay. If the villain loses, all right, there's got to be an effect, a serious, major effect on your protagonist, on your main character or characters, okay, and again, the people that surround her environment. What does the showdown, the clash, the end explosion, you know, what is it going to produce? What is the effect of it? What is the result of it? What fruit is it going to bear? So, yeah, and you've got to have that in the, you know, you've got to have that in the story. The showdown is kind of like the next climax, but it's towards the end of the story. So make sure that you've got that as well. Make sure that it's big. Make sure that it is as powerful as the catalyst that you had at the beginning of the story, okay? And the crisis of it. So I would say like the catalyst, the big event, this thing that happens to your character that changes them forever, okay? And that midpoint where there's like no turning back. So the catalyst, the big event, and then the showdown, they're kind of on the same level. So make sure that the power of the story in those moments, at those points, okay, are exactly the same. They have the same energy, they have the same power, they have the same punch. You want your reader to scream, cry, no, okay? Okay? If you really mean, you could kill off your protagonist in the battle, and then another protagonist rises up and conquers the villain. I'm just, you know, something like that. Okay, make it interesting. Get that reader so invested and so riveted on what you are saying and doing in your story that they cannot let go of your story. That is what you want. Okay, then plot point 7, the realization, where after the showdown, the character understands and the reader sees how much she or he has changed completely. The way they think, who they are, completely changed. I'm going to give you a quick example before I end the video. In my novel, Avalin, a Vympari Legend, it is a wonderful, it's like a paranormal romance, but it's horror, action, and all about vampires, but it's got a major twist on it. It's not the typical vampire mythology. But now I've got my main character. At the start of the story, she is demure, she is broken. She has lost her love. She has lost her son, her husband. She's poor. She's literally looking to end her life. That's where she is. So she's very demure. She's very small. Okay. At the end of the story, after the showdown, she is the complete opposite. She is powerful. She is strong. She is vivacious. And she just rules the story. Okay, so she starts this little thing and she ends up this opposite. That is the realization. She understands that in order for her to become who she's become, she had to go through all her trauma and all her drama. And this is what the reader also has to see. The reader has to see that realization. Oh my goodness, how has this character evolved from this person to this person, and how powerful it is. Okay. Then you keep that reader to the very, very last page. All right. And then, like in movies, there's called a denouement. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'll put it on the screen. Denouement, where you tie everything together. That it's almost like an 8th plot point, okay, but it's kind of with a realization towards the end of the story. Tying things off gives the reader the satisfaction of a completed story. So it is very, very important. I always make sure that my readers at the end of every single story have an emotional, satisfying ending to the story, because then it leaves your reader, unless you're writing a series, of course, then you must always have a climax at the end of each book. Okay, so at the end of every single book, until the last book, you always finish on a high note. You finish on a cliffhanger, because that gets them back to the next book. All right. So, but at the end of a story, when you finished it, there must be a completion, or must there? Okay. I personally don't enjoy watching a film where all my questions haven't been answered, but that's just me. All right. So if you are that kind of writer, fantastic. Maybe your reader will contact you and say, I need to know, okay? And then maybe you can share that secret with them, or maybe not. All right, guys, I'm going to leave it there. I hope this was really helpful. I'm going to break this video down into those 7 plot points for you so that you can watch them in snippets. But please comment, tell me what you think about it, all right? Tell me your thoughts, how you approach your stories. I'd absolutely love to hear it, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.